Welcome to this video lecture for digital media and imagery. And we're just going to make it nice and big. Nice, beautiful fade. Very nice. For ART142. Definitely take notes and follow along. There will be additional readings, viewings, websites, whatnot for you to follow along with as well. And then there's optional ones. So there's required ones and optional ones. So working with digital imagery is something that we're going to be working a lot with because we're doing digital photography. So something to get comfortable with sort of how digital media, digital imagery works as you're making photographic images. So we're going to work with a raster-based image set. So if you've taken ART169, if you had it with me, you know that really into raster versus vector. But we're just going to deal with raster right now, which is sometimes called bitmap. And it is sort of an image that's made up of a rectangular set of pixels. So raster is pixels. So when the density of pixels is great enough, a grid will simulate a continuous image. So think of a Monet where he has all the dots. If you're up close to it, you can't see it. If you step back, you can see the full image. Or if you had a tube TV and if you stood too close to it, you can actually see the little screen lines on it. And step back and it creates an image. If you zoom into an image like this, you can see all the individual pixels lined up, and based on the colors, the values, they create a photograph in your brain. So when we talk about resolution with talking about digital imagery, it refers to two things: the number of pixels, the total number of pixels, and the density of pixels. So resolution has sort of two terms. So when we talk about resolution, we could be talking about a whole bunch of different things, which can be very confusing. So the total number of pixels, and you'll hear this a lot when you're buying your camera, it's saying it's like 12 megapixels, 8 megapixels, and a megapixel is 1 million pixels. So it's saying the total number of pixels in the photograph that you make out of this camera is going to be 12 million. It doesn't say the width or the height of it, but it just says this is how much data you're getting in one photograph. So the higher the number, the better. That's the only time you really talk about the total number of pixels in an image is really when you're referring to cameras and what it could be with 12 or 48 or 1 million megapixels. You don't really hear that term anywhere outside of that. Mostly you hear about it when you're talking about like width times height, the resolution, so how long or the height of it. So if I have a file that's 1080 by 720, that means the file would be 160 pixels wide and 170 pixels tall. So that's sort of, you hear that. And if you're actually talking about digital video, it sort of drops that with 720, 1080, and I should know what 4K is, but I don't off the top of my head. But 4K is actually just referred to as 4K or the actual pixel set. So should be 2160, I guess that's what it would be. So it would be that number duplicated, but no, it wouldn't be 2160. We're not going to deal with that right now. So an image that's 1,000 by 1,000 pixels is 1 megapixel. So it's just multiplying the width times height, and that's how you determine if it is 1 megapixel or not. But largely you don't refer to megapixels outside of purchasing cameras. But we talk about the density a little differently. So we don't talk about it as total number of pixels, but how many pixels per inch. This is what we talk about a lot when we say, oh, the resolution needs to be 300 dpi. So if you look at 1 inch of your picture, how many pixels are across left times right. So we have these images down here. So if it's 1 pixels per inch, PPI or DPI, there's a lot of people who say you shouldn't use one or the other. I use them interchangeably. It's never really affected me professionally. So it would be 1 pixel width, 1 pixel height. 2 pixels width, 2 pixels height, for a total of 4. Think of it as like you have a room that is 4 feet long and 4 feet wide, and you have a total of 16 square feet in your room. It'd be a very small room, but that's sort of another way to think about this. It's per inch, and how many increments are per inches. The greater the number, it's going to be glorious. Typically, 300 is your print resolution. You want to make everything 300 DPI. So I have this image that's 3 inches by 2 1/4, and it's 300 DPI. Very clear, you can see it, all the details, the sprinkles. Now if we kept the same width times height, but we decrease the amount of pixels per inch, the image is less clear. You can still get it, you can probably pass it by, you know, you're not looking at that image as this size, but maybe smaller, you can kind of work with it. But as you keep going lower, the quality lessens. Because part of the pixels that are not filling up the inch, you know, it's not as clear. We've thrown them out as we're making something smaller. But different mediums require different resolutions. So the only 2 resolutions you should really be concerned with is either 72 DPI or 300 DPI. 72, great if you're displaying something on the web or your screen, and 300 is for print. Now I am going to be viewing your images on my computer, but I want it to be 300 DPI because I want you to get used to the idea of eventually your images are going to be printed. And we'll talk about this in the Photoshop demo that you'll have, but you can check and adjust your resolution in Adobe Photoshop. And it kind of tells you your resolution width times height of pixels. You can do these drop downs to see inches, and then your resolution, which is really what we refer to as resolution, is the density, and that would be how many pixels per inch. I'm falling and I can't get up. So when it comes to resolution and size of raster graphics, you can always make an image smaller, but you can never make it larger. So if you decrease an image and I take my photograph and say, you know what, I'm going to make it smaller, it's going to create a crisper, sharper image because we're just throwing away pixels, and it's going to look a little crispier, which may be something you don't want. But if you increase it and say, I want to make my 8x10 image 40 by 60 inches, but I want to keep my 300 DPI resolution, well, I'm telling Photoshop it has to invent pixels. And Photoshop isn't the smartest all the time, so you can't make anything bigger, but you can always make things smaller. We have different file formats. The most popular ones will be GIF, PNG, JPEG, PSD, TIFF, and RAW, which will have different file formats. Mostly we'll be using JPEG or PSD. Your JPEG and PSD are like your common file formats. They use lossy compression, so they can have a little quality sometimes when you're not wanting it to be larger. JPEGs, they're common, but if you save the same JPEG 6 times, you can ruin the file format. So use JPEGs, but don't rely on them all the time. PSD is your Photoshop document. It's the native file format. It's great because you can edit it a whole bunch non-destructively. You can save your layers, all of your work within the software. PSDs are amazing. You can put them in different formats. So I can put my PSD in Adobe Premiere, InDesign, Illustrator, whatnot. These file sizes are super large, so that's something to be aware of, but always save a PSD with whatever you're working on if you have layers. TIFF, which is kind of like a PSD, it has this really large file format, but you can save layers. They're popular if you're studying for high-end printing, but that's about it. They're not really popular. I used to have to save things in TIFFs when I was in high school for computer graphics, but I haven't had to submit anything as a TIFF in the last 15 years, so pretty good that you probably won't need them. Ping, which if you may have seen, it combines the qualities of a JPEG and a GIF, so you can have transparency and lossless compression. So they're actually really great files, but they're quite large. Lower load time with up viewing them. Typically you won't send a ping to anybody, but you can use them. A GIF, not a GIF, because it's not graphics. It's graphics. Laugh track. The format supports up to 8 bits per pixel for each image, so it doesn't allow full tonal range, so they're not recommended for high-end printing. They do support animation and transparency, which is really great, and they're very early internet, which is, I have a soft spot for the GIF. I love a good GIF. RAW. So these are uncompressed file formats, and they're like your digital negative. You can do so much with a RAW file, because when you take a RAW file with your camera, and you can only create RAW files with cameras, really. You can do it elsewhere, but really they're only functional for cameras. You should always shoot in it if your camera will allow you to, but it has a really wide dynamic range. So when it's recording your data onto the sensor, it's recording not just what it sees, but more than what it sees a little bit to create the file format, so that I can take those shadows and push them further, take those highlights and push them further. So much information that's in there, so definitely shoot RAW if your camera will allow it. Each camera company will have a new file extension for their RAW format. So we have CR2 for Canon, NEF for Nikon, ARW is for like Sony, and you want to update your software often because they will update the RAW files often. So there were some issues with older Lightroom applications not being able to open the ARW file format. So if you're not updated on it, you can't open different file formats. EXIF data, which is sort of your file's metadata, which is data about data. And my whole life's metadata, so I'm really into it. But it contains information as your aperture, shutter speed, ISO, focal length, etc. This is really important because I want to know, what are you shooting? I'm not with you when you're out shooting, so I can't really help you with saying, you really need to be shooting at a lower ISO. I can see this information on your images and help you there. So it's really cool. All your camera needs to have it. So make sure your camera can produce EXIF data. Additional information is storing your files either on a flash drive or a portable hard drive, because you will use so much space on your personal computer. So keep a file backup on a portable hard drive or in the cloud. Dropbox is great, but you can only get like 1 gig for free. But your Maricopa Google Drive is unlimited, so you can store things in your Maricopa Google Drive, which we'll be using for this class. File organization. So I am a nerd for file organization. You need to be organized. I really hate it when I'm teaching an in-person class and I'm asking someone, hey, can you pull up this file? I want to see it. And they have everything in one folder and they're not named anything. They're just like cat1, which means nothing. So you definitely want to make sure you have your folders organized nice and neatly by date, names, whatever. Make it organized. Make your file names something recognizable. I work for Fox putting shows onto Tubi, Hulu, Zumo, etc. And when people send me files, I have to know exactly what show it's for, season, episode, if it's the master, if it's a file for Hulu, how many channels are in my audio, if it's English, is my subtitles embedded. And I have to get all that information from a file name. So I'm really into making people learn to make good file names and good folder structures, because if you work in a digital realm professionally, you need to be able to get that across. So, big nerd for file naming conventions and file organization. Which brings us to this. Your file naming conventions always will have a name of a file, period, and extension. You can put periods in file names, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't put special characters. You shouldn't put spaces. So keep that in mind. There's a link about file naming conventions. Again, I'm a nerd about this, so really into good file naming conventions, so make sure they're good. So I want you to read some additional videos or websites. There's a chapter you should read, and I think there's a video or two. So nerd out on some file naming conventions and other digital media information. Study up for the quiz. Definitely take notes over this video again, because there'll be some things that are within the quiz. Good luck on your quiz. It's open note.